should be off and running right about now. So good evening, folks. We'll just let Craig back in, see if he's any better.
Hey, hi.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you better now.
Good. Thank you.
Very masterful headphones on. It's really loud.
Good. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, folks. Off to a good start, yeah. Hope you're all enjoying the heat wave we're having here in Scotland. I don't know what next weather's like, but we are having a heat wave. That's why I'm not milk bottle colour. You know, I look kind of red, like a bit of strawberry. No, but tonight we have Craig down there, and our guest tonight is paranormal investigator, writer, horror film director, etc., co-host on Simply Spooky Network, Mr. Nick Mulae. I can never pronounce your second name.
It's don't worry, it's not the first time. It's actually pronounced as Mulae. It's an Italian last name.
Another Italian. John and Zuner on last week, so that's two Italians 2 weeks in a row. I mean, Sophia temporarily last night. 3 Italians, you know what I mean? But I want to say first off, it's been quite a while since we spoke to Nick. It's been 2 years, so it's a long time. And he's that busy, and he co-hosts with Lois Haddow on the Simply Spooky Network. Yeah. So tonight, Lois, I know we've got you.
And she'll get her revenge tomorrow.
I've seen that tomorrow, so I don't care. I don't care because it's one of the moments in life that you get, and you don't get them very often, but you just need to treasure them and rub it right in as much as you can, because you know you're going to die the next day anyway, you know. Hi, Nick, and there's Laura, Craig's better half. But so Lois, Nick's here. You're not getting him for at least another 60 minutes, so you can have a ride. It's like the cat that got the cream with that. Look, as I said before, Nick, I've been watching your shows, and I do like putting the odd comment and to kind of wind her up and what have you. So, but she is a lovely lady. I need to say that. You know,
absolutely. She's been fantastic, and I've really been proud to work with her for the most part. You know, doing these shows there. I mean, you guys obviously know I do a number of other shows too, but when I'm working alongside Lois, it's fantastic.
Yes, but I've known Lois for 4 years now, something like that, and I've been out there a few times. You know, and she's good at what she does, and she's passionate. You know, and she's nuts, which suits her. You know, nuts in a good way. I mean, you know.
That's why you get on. You're both nuts.
I think that's why we go on so well, because we're both got kind of mentality of a 10-year-old, basically. You know what I mean? Anyway, I think I've gotten enough. Shall we carry on? So, Nick, we've known Nick on for about 2 years. So he's a very, very busy chappy. And I'm going to let Nick tell you about himself, because I've forgotten half of it. It's been that long since we spoke to him. You know, I've been honest, you know.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so for about myself, first off, I've been a paranormal investigator now for 18 years, since I was 12. So I've had quite a history of involvement with the subject. And to start off with things, it's been quite a ride, and still counting to this day. I mean, I'm not going anywhere soon, but you know, starting it off at a young age, I think was truly a great start, because you really kind of got the understanding of, like, you know, what it means first off to be a paranormal investigator, also learning, you know, especially a lot from the older paranormal shows that used to be on the Travel Channel. So not like with what we have now, because in my opinion, I think a lot of the older shows had a lot more education to them than what you have nowadays. So, of course, I also read a number of books. But the other interesting thing, too, is, and you hear this a lot from other paranormal investigators, is that usually a lot of people who get into the field, It's usually because they had an experience that they had when they were younger. That never really happened to me at a young age. It was just, for the most part, curiosity that brought me in. I mean, I was already a big fan of horror films, at an even younger age, like at 6 or 7. And when I started coming across these other, haunted house films that were based on true stories, particularly the Amityville Horror, which I still consider that like the debut for me to really study on these cases, that it really kind of kicked off with me. So that's where, again, I learned a lot of that education. So it was a lot more of curiosity than an experience.
See, I think it's better that way because, people come out, as you say, you came out of Paranormal at a very young age, and the older ghost shows were on, not disrespect to the ones that are, there are some good ones out there, but, 80% of them are cabbage, basically, I'm going to be honest, and I think if you come into the Paranormal at a young age and you're seeing the older ghost shows, it gives you a whole different perspective on the paranormal. Whereas people coming in, these days, they're used to, Ghost Adventures or whatever show it is, and they've got a totally wrong idea of how the paranormal is. So they go investigating, expecting to meet a demon and, headstones be flying over their heads and stuff like that.
Right.
Which we know isn't really the case, So you're a big horror fan as well.
Oh yeah, I've been watching those since I was like 6 or 7. And again, my love for the horror genre hasn't dwindled at all. So it's still going very strong.
I was about I'm the same as you. I've loved horror films since I was 6 or 7. I was watching slightly more tame programs when I was 6 or 7. But like Friday 13th, Halloween, or that My Bloody Valentine, the old ones. That's what I kind of grew up on. Folk used to think, I don't know if you got this, Nick, I was weird behind your head, dog, because I like to blood and guts and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love a lot of the splatter films too. I mean, that didn't come until later, until at least to my teenage years. But I started out pretty simple. Like when I started getting into this. In fact, there even is somewhat I should have mentioned. There's even kind of an origin even before I started like paranormal stuff that once again crosses paths with the horror genre. My growing up in the 90s, we used to watch the X-Files, which at that time was still relatively brand new. And some of the episodes were pretty graphic. So I think in some way, shape, or form, I was really exposed to like pretty much anything you can think of in the horror genre, with the exception of like the slasher films. Like you had your ghosts, you had aliens, you had gruesome murders that occurred. It was like all packed up in this television series for just a 1-hour episode. And I still can't believe to this day that our parents got to let us watch it at such a very young age. When it's a show like X-Files, it's not really, meant to be a show for like really young kids, especially if you're only like 5, 6, 7 years old.
We seem to be Eric's saying, Laura and Jeanette's saying there's some kind of feedback. I can't hear it in my end.
Yeah, I've been hearing some feedback too. I don't know where that's coming from though.
I can hear it too. Yeah.
I do apologise, folks, for the feedback. I don't know. I've got no idea where it's coming from. As everybody knows, I'm thick. I'm just. Hey, Kate Domino Scott, where headphones, definitely feedback. Sounds like a woman speaking in the background.
It kind of does.
It's kind of like mumbling in the background. It's like almost like a TV or something.
I do have headphones, but they're in my ghost bag, which is away in the other room. They're packed away tomorrow. We use them. So apologies, my headphones are kind of here, but they're not here. They're packed away in my ghost bag for tomorrow.
It's a ghost bag. Not everybody can see it. Only certain people.
I'm the only one. whereas your headphones will go away, I'm sure. I actually don't know where to plug the headphones in this computer. This new computer we got a few months back, and I don't have a clue where the pluggy thing is, and I'm scared to even try it in case it cuts everything off. Maybe someone has a. Well, it's possible, very, very possible, Eric. So I do apologise for the feedback, folks. I can't hear it, honestly. I can't hear a thing. What was I saying?
I don't hear it. I was going to say, I don't hear it either now. So it's like, well, not now it's coming back. I don't know where it's coming from. I know it's not from my microphone.
I can hear it when you talk recently. I can hear it just saying, Nick. And I also hear it when I talk, but not when Scott talks, really.
What we'll do is, I do apologise, we'll do a quick test. Nick, I'll mute you just now, right?
Okay.
It's not what I talk to you. I just want to find out, see who the culprit is with the feedback.
Yeah, sure, that's totally fine.
So if you can tell us in the comments if you can hear it now.
Can you hear it now?
No, we've muted.
I can hear it when I talk.
It's coming from Scott's computer. Headphones will solve it. I don't know where these headphones go in this computer. Laura says she can't hear it. Eric's saying yep a little. So what I'll do is I'll unmute Nick. I'll unmute
Unmute Mike.
That's how long it
might be.
I forgot.
Really good.
It's just my opinion. I think it might be coming from Craig's side. That's how it sounds, at least from my side.
Right.
See if I can.
You can mute your others are speaking, Scots. There you go. Kate's got the remedy. So I'll mute myself when you're talking. Don't hear it with Scott. I don't know what's going on. I think it's Nick. He's just, whenever this problem. We ask him back and bang, all goes wootsy up. It's Nick's vampire alien coups. I forgot totally what we were saying. So how did you get into the writing the horror movies and stuff? I'll mute myself.
So again, that was a couple years later, in fact, in high school, in fact, because I was always, again, growing up with these movies, you watch a lot of your typical like slasher films and horror film, like The Friday, and also like for one of my all-time favorites is like Night of the Living Dead with George A. Romero. A lot of those directors from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s were huge inspirations for me. So, while I was still in my teenage years, I was hoping that in some way I could try to continue on their legacy. And it's definitely a good thing I have in some way, shape, or form, because sadly, a lot of these directors have passed away over the last couple of years. So someone's got to take over and continue where they left off. But it really wasn't until I think I was about to graduate high school that I finally started working on really my first film ever. Although the film that I worked on was not actually a movie. It was a documentary that I had made, which, as hard as it sounds this is going to sound to believe, it actually took me 5 years to really get this film completed. The documentary film, it was called 25 Scariest Movie Moments, which was actually a fan-made sequel to a number of other horror countdown documentaries that were made over the years. So it all kind of started now almost 20 years ago with a 5-part miniseries that was called the 100 Scariest Movie Moments. And over the years, they started making all these other countdowns. And a few other film companies started cashing in, sometimes even used some of the same films. So when I was making my own version, if you will, I was going to, I wanted to make my own version and really kind of make it, even if it wasn't like an official sequel, at least a fan-made sequel, it would be a list of movies. Like you would not see a lot of the classic horror films on this list because it's a list of movies that didn't quite make it to these other lists or films that just recently came out. So, like I said, it took me 5 years because, I had to get a lot of participants, with all you guys that I know really well. Of course, I wish I could have known you guys, years earlier, because that way I think I would have been able to speed up the process. But, either way, I was able to really put this together independently, and we actually even had a theatrical release at believe it or not, a haunted high school in Chicago, which was at Carl Schurz High School, which so far was the only time I ever showed it publicly. But even though I haven't shown it, it's not that I don't want to show it anymore. It's just when you make a film and when you watch on the screen, you start seeing these errors that somehow you miss. You kind of have to go back and fix that all up because, again, 5 years in the making, knowing that it's going to take you, you definitely deserve, you definitely need a well-deserved break after you've made a film like that for so long. So I'm hoping at some point in the future I'll be able to finally get back into working on it to try to edit out all these errors, because there are a lot of the participants that were in the film, I can't even get a hold of them anymore. So you have pieces of footage that you have that you just didn't feel like was necessary for the film anymore. So I'm going to try to cut it down to a much more manageable level because, believe it or not, this film, it's actually 3.5 hours long. It's that long of a series. But by cutting down a lot of this footage that is just no longer necessary, I'm hoping to try to get it down to at least an hour and a half.
Yeah. I know I can understand where you're coming from. We kind of not totally anytime you watch your films, you kind of you notice the mistakes, everything. Not your films, but I'm studying film and television, basically at my local college. And every time I go back and I look at, I've done sort of 3-minute, 5-minute films. And every time I go back, I always notice something different. Every time I watch one of my completed films, I always think to myself, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done. It's very, very sort of hard to objectively watch something that you've made, the film that you've made, and sort of just kind of, relax. You're always looking for that little bit of a problem. So I completely understand about that. It's really kind of cool.
And I definitely agree with what Kate says, because for the most part, because this was my first ever film, I did all the editing myself. And when you're talking about making a film like this again for 5 years, I mean, I'm talking not within those 5 years, I was spending hours and hours, days, weeks, months, getting all the editing right. And there were times that sometimes I was up till about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with this editing. And it's just, it can be so stressful. I mean, when you're making something like this, obviously, yes, you get tired, you want to do something else, but you're just so desperate to want to get this done and have it released publicly to see how everybody will think of your time as your work as a first-time director.
I'm going to go and get these headphones. I'm going to leave you two chatting. I'm going to go because I found Eric had put a comment out saying with wee headphones got a little picture of headphones. So Kate's saying that she can hear feedback again. So I'm mute this. I'm going to go and grab these headphones. Just talk amongst yourselves. This doesn't usually happen, but I'm going to go and get the bugger. So talk amongst yourselves. All right, everybody. All right. And see if Lois is watching. I bet she's laughing because this is going whoopsie. Yeah. I bet she's. She'll be like,
you know what? I actually did send her the link so she can watch it, but she hasn't. I've been looking back. She hasn't seen the link yet, so I'm still waiting for it.
You wait all that time to get them on. When you get them on, the sound goes nuts. I bet she'll be like that. Great. Be back in 2 seconds, folks.
Oh dear. This is what happened. We're normally more professional than this. Onto it. But it does kind of it shows that it's kind of live. But But I understand kind of like where you're coming from. You said that you were basically inspired. You watched your first horror movies when you were about 5 or 6 years old and everything like that. And mine kind of like come from the same place. I was very into movies. I grew up watching movies, old silence, everything like that. Um, I was quite spiritual, grew up in a Christian background, and I always just, I think it's one of these things. It's just like if you watch so many like The Haunting or Amityville, you know, or even Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, basically it does inlay in you basically could these things happen, and backing that up with it on a more spiritual kind of like plane, and a more spiritual kind of like things where I grew up with, it was just, you know, I just grew fascinated with the whole thing because, you know, I mean, I remember the first horror movie I really remember having a total effect was the John Carpenter's The Thing when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And, you know, it's just, I had to fall asleep with a bucket next to me in case I threw up. Had night terrors and threw up because it was just so effective. But yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying. You kind of like it. It brings you into this kind of what is real, what is not real, all the stuff that's based on a true story. It makes you want to find out more about all these kind of things like Amityville, The Haunting of Hill House, everything like that. It's fascinating. I totally get that.
Right.
You okay, Scott?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not hearing the feedback this time.
No feedback.
Can anybody in the chat hear the feedback?
No. No, there's nothing coming through.
Woohoo! I hate wearing these things. We wear them in investigation, obviously, for the blind spirit box and what have you, but I hate wearing them doing a live because I always feel like I'm waiting to land a plane. You know what I mean? I always feel like I'm waiting for the plane to come in, you know.
It's like the beginning of Westworld, the film, basically, just when they're flying the plane over the desert, man. That's...
I'm going to catch up with these comments because you're not in my house, Gaffer. She's chatting to me. Who's she talking about? Oh, Lois. She talking about Lois.
Yeah, I think she is.
I'm surprised too, since Lois has a crush on Nick. Oh, is there a wee crush there, Nick? He's disappeared. Aye.
She's got a story to tell you about that. It's something involving the state of North Carolina, but she can tell it better than I could.
We have to remember that.
Yeah.
Here's for example. Like she loves me more than Nick. How did you come back to that one? I'm playing a wee quick catch up, folks. I love the thing. I also love the prequel. Perfect. Feedback is gone. All clear now. I don't think I plugged it in properly. She's talking about the microphone. Talking about
Blame
the
partner.
I just want to emphasize that it's the microphone. Right. We had a question for you, Nick, and I seem to have lost it. No, it's for Kate. There it's there. How did you get your ideas to a storyboard, Nick?
For the most part, like I said, I think I really got it from really like a lot of different films, you know, for any type of storyboard. Because actually, one other thing that is definitely worth bringing up, and I don't really talk about it too often, not because I don't, it's just that it's kind of been a forgotten project. I actually even tried making, before I made this documentary, I even actually tried making my own slasher film again. In fact, back when I was still in high school, which it was supposed to be like a simple slasher film that was supposed to be like a throwback to a lot of the classic ones from the 70s and 80s. So I got a lot of those storyboards from those films themselves again, and I wanted to try to give it a shot myself. unfortunately, we did shoot some footage of it, and we actually had some pretty great shots. But that film is it's a lost film now because sadly, and it's going to sound hard to believe, but my best friend at the time, he had another friend of his that he was into the drug business, and somehow he stole his camera and he sold it with the footage on it. And when I heard about that, I was like, I cannot even tell you how upset I was when that happened. I was so pissed that he didn't even stop him.
That is rough. But I just want to jump back to what you were talking about when I was muted. It's not very often I'm muted. But however, tonight was one of the times. We were talking about the editing and the putting stuff together. Eric says it as well, and Kate commented on it. There's Craig. Craig disappeared and he's back again. It's all going really well tonight. I think Lois is cussed to shoot the right show. I think she has cussed it. Getting it perfect, noticing mistakes and trying to get it spotted must take ages, but it does so rewarding. And Eric says, to make it perfect because it's your baby. I can totally relate to what Kate and Eric and yourself saying, Nick, and also Craig. We're currently putting together a video of we were at the wall, the unveiling of the wall is Soak about 2 weeks ago, something like that. And so we're doing a video for them. And we were up at Laura's last week. I think it was 2 days we were up there putting this video together. And it's time because Sarah does all the editing stuff because I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
I don't have a clue. And it's time consuming putting it all together. And then, you see it running, you think, that's not right. Sarah usually falls out with me because, you get the idea in your head and you want to put it onto the footage, and then you see on the footage and you think, that's not how I imagined it to be, and so it does get frustrating. Got a couple of questions for you, Nick. Yeah. Kate's wanting to know where you are.
First off, she's right. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois.
That's where Kate is. Funnily enough, that's where Kate's from. Where do you get your scores for the film? Do you have a friend who does the music, or is it bought?
So surprisingly, it's actually neither. Because again, with how YouTube is being used nowadays, for the most part, I borrow a lot of music on YouTube itself because they do have in this day and age, they have a lot of free royalty, horror music that you could use as long, of course, as you're putting, credit into the artist. And that's actually what I do right at the end of the film. You see all the scores, the credits themselves. So it's usually just something very simple. But the difficult part is it's not necessarily the type of music that you got to find. You want to find like a certain track that will fit well with what we're talking about or whatever the subject matter is, because you want it to fit. You want it to sound, unnerving, of course, since this is a horror documentary, but you also kind of want to make it fun too, like giving that adrenaline feeling. So it's more of the searching than actually finding the songs. I think takes the most time out of everything when you're putting the music scores together.
Because you want to kind of scare the bejesus out of people, basically. That's I think that's the whole thing. The Twilight theme is only 3 notes. So I'm a blood and guts man. There's many, many great horror films out there, and I've seen maybe 3 or 4 with no blood and guts, and they've been good. But I prefer to see people losing limbs and appendages in a film.
Yeah, me too.
Some people have called me sick. Maybe I was going to turn it to be a serial killer or whatever. But you can't be. The film The Hills Have Eyes, 1 and 2.
Oh yes, I know that one all too well. I've seen both the original and the remake. Yeah.
I love the Saw films.
Oh yes, Saw is just fantastic. I mean, normally some people always kind of put that more into the the so-called torture genre. I don't really think it's that. I mean, if you look at a different film, more like a movie like Hostel, for example, which really does demonstrate that gruesome scenes of torture. I mean, Saw has a little bit of that, but it doesn't really dive into that subject matter as like a movie like Hostel does, because Saw, in a way, still kind of has that slasher element to it than these other torture films that were made throughout the early 2000s. And I look back at that era now. It's kind of ironic that they were making this almost like in a response to like all these, you know, PG-13 horror movies that were being released around the same time.
Yeah.
The Saw films, I love all the different devices and, you know, the Jigsaw comes up with, but I think they really got it spot on with the voice of Jigsaw as well. I think I think the voice completes it, you know, makes it more menacing just listening to him speaking, basically, you know. But you can't beat a good horror film where somebody's getting macheted to nothing, you know, and they maybe just got one finger left, and that's all they find is a finger, you know.
I actually recall when I was like 12, I saw the first Saw movie, and it was, in fact, right around the same time when the second one was coming out in theaters. And I still remember this to this day. I was going to a friend's sleepover, and he was going to show me. He's like, "Let's watch Saw" or something like that, since the second one's coming out. And I was like, "Well, my mom told me I can't watch those movies." So what I did was I called her up and I said, "Yeah, this guy, this friend of mine, he wants to show Saw," and she's like, "No, you are not watching that movie." And I didn't know really how to respond to it, because, you know, I was at a friend's house. I didn't want to start, you know, an argument on the phone. So I was like, "All right, fine, we won't watch it." But of course, typical preteen behavior. Right after the phone was hung up, we watched Saw. And the next day when my mom picked me up, she's like, "You watched Saw, didn't you?" And I was like, "Unfortunately, yes." But she's like, "Fine." It's just like she couldn't beat this.
I loved this the first Saw film, and I think that I might be wrong with this, but I think it was the guy who was chained to the peg that actually wrote the first one.
Yeah, that was oh my god,
I can't remember his name.
I know his face, and I seriously don't know why I can't remember his name right now. But he was, I think he was the writer of it, but I think he was also involved in some of the other movies in some way, shape, or form. I seriously don't know why I can't remember his name. I actually just looked at, Lee Wannell. That's who it was.
It was and I think the sort of a few questions and comments, which I will come to in a wee second. I think the first thing about the Saw film was it was more, there wasn't a lot of blood and guts in it, you know, like the rest of them, but it was more a kind of psychological thing. These two guys trapped in what used to be a big bathroom, I'm taking it, you know, and you know, what would you do? And then you see him with the saw, and you know, you can almost feel the foot getting cut off and stuff like that. And that was great. It was good.
Yeah.
Man.
That's why I always think as it still has that slasher element, but unlike again, you see with earlier films where they just sometimes cut right to the chase and start, you know, butchering, chopping people up, you know, all this crazy stuff. Instead, it doesn't start off like that when you see those older films. It slowly gets there. Like, it actually takes its time, you know, like, so you can get an idea of like getting to know the characters, getting to know their backstory, getting to pretty much get the idea of like who Jigsaw is. And so, I mean, yes, we don't really find out until later movies, but you get an idea at the very least. So it does it in a very careful and organized way.
It's kind of like Psycho. I mean, basically, Psycho takes about half an hour, 45 minutes before basically they get to the Bates Motel, basically, onto that. And it's about an hour in before anybody's kind of like, before, you know, the famous shower scene into it. It's building, I think, in that day and age, kind of like earlier, the kind of like the audiences were expecting a bit more of a story, a bit more of grown up, Whereas in the 80s, when we started getting people like John Carpenter, Wes Craven was coming mainstream, everything like that, it was people were growing up with the video nasties, so-called video nasties, and expecting a lot more sort of like blood. Sam Raimi came along with Evil Dead around about 1983. It was, people began to expect, oh, no, let's get straight to the blood. Let's get straight to what the people want. The blood, the guts, the gore, and an awful lot of people are kind of like got desensitized to it, and to that. So I mean, but it's definitely. I feel a bit worse because I'm definitely not a blood guts and gore person. But
No.
John Carpenter's The Thing is about as far as I go, and that's pretty far.
The more guts, the better.
Pretty far,
Well, even a movie like, again, with Saw, I mean, with the slasher element, I mean, if you look at a lot of these slasher films, even the ones that are not as good as, like with what we have today, they all have some kind of connection, and it all goes back to a movie like Psycho, because Psycho was the one that, I mean, Psycho wasn't necessarily the first slasher movie ever, but it was the first slasher film that really generated a lot of interest and attention.
I'm going to cut in, guys. Message from Lois, as you can see. Dear Baldy, stay away from Nick. He's mine. I knew there'd be a comment somewhere. If you don't, Laura's coming to frighten us. Eyes, my stuff. Lois, Laura.
Which one is the Baldy? It's...
Laura. Tell Lois from me, bring it on, women. I've had quite a few comments here. I want to get some questions for you, Nick, but I want to get one good point that Eric makes about the Saw films. Was that he never really killed anybody. They always killed themselves.
I do recall, actually. If you think about, like, if you watch like the second one, when whoever was that the police guy, he's interrogating Jigsaw, and he says something like, he first asks him a question saying, what do you think the cure for cancer is? He's like, what? The cure for cancer? He's like, I don't know. I do know it's not killing and torturing people, but his response is, I've never murdered anyone in my life. The decisions are up to them. So he does. It just seems like he's always making himself one step ahead to basically isolate himself from actually being labeled as a serial killer.
I remember one, where I'll get to Kate's comments 2 seconds. I remember one part of the film where the guy is pretending to be a Saw survivor, and Jigsaw goes into his book signing, and he says to him, I think it was ancient Egypt, you were took before somebody, and they used to say, if I'm lying, take me to the quarries. I always remember that line for the film.
That. I think I remember that. See, my brother, he's also another huge fan of the Jigsaw series, and it's like he has just been like, it's like he knows all these different traps and stuff and torture instruments that he uses. It's like if he was on right now, he would be going on for hours talking about all those instruments that are being used in those films. It's just insane of what they always come up with for a movie like Saw.
Right, Nick, you're going to earn your money now, because I've got 3 or 4 questions from Kate for you.
Okay.
So are you ready for this? Here we go.
I'm ready.
Do you find writing scripts fun, or get writer's block? Do you base characters and people you know?
So I actually did. I've never really written too many scripts, but I have tried. I do find it fun in some way, as long as it's like a script that I could probably put together within a day or two. Like, I mean, of course, I know most of the time scripts take days or even weeks to put together. But if you're making a short film and you don't really have the intention of making it like a very long plot in some way, it can get fun. I mean, I've never really experienced writer's block as most filmmakers would probably have, but there's been quite a few times where it's fun, But at the same time, though, again, it can be time consuming because you really got to kind of sit down and think carefully. Because I unfortunately, this was never made either. I actually tried making my own horror film series, although it's never been truly abandoned because, as you guys know, I've been doing all these scary stories audiobooks lately. And there was one director, and he actually used, I'm using the same words. He said, a well-known director named Mick Garris. He did a lot of the Stephen King adaptations throughout the 80s and 90s. He also did the Masters of Horror television series back in the early 2000s on Showtime. But I really agreed with one point with something that he once said, because I was following the path that he was going on, is that the horror genre, for the most part, has just at times just been repeating itself. So, I really don't want to see, another cat jumping out of the trash can, or the hand on the shoulder, or the voice on the telephone. I'm trying to avoid a lot of those old techniques so we can finally try to focus on things that haven't been done before.
Yeah, it is quite. I've got another one or two questions for you, but writing scripts is quite time consuming, and because always we're quite close with CRA Entertainment with David Espinosa, Craig Arns, and obviously they've done quite a few movies in their time. What have you? David's been doing it for over 40 years now, and I've spoke to them quite a lot, and they're talking about writing scripts, putting movies together. And it's no just a case of writing down an idea and then filming it. There's a lot goes into, putting the script together, getting the ideas, the characters, the plot, and making them all kind of fit in. So I totally get where you're coming from. What's the first film that had a massive impact on you and made you think, I want to make films?
Honestly, I think the one that really got to me was George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It was just, that was just, if you kind of look at it carefully, it almost had the elements again of like a student film, because it was just a simple film that was just shot in a nearby cemetery and farmhouse in Pennsylvania, and they were just going to give it a go. Then even Romero had said before he passed away that they didn't think that this was going to be like a huge success. But if that wasn't enough, not only, of course, did I, have I seen that film again at a young age, but furthermore, I also had the chance of actually meeting him in person over almost 15 years ago now. In fact, I remember the first time I got to meet George A. Romero at a Fangoria convention in Chicago when I was 16 years old. I remember I actually had to wait in line for over an hour to see him because the line had literally wrapped around the convention just for him to appear, because this was around the 40th anniversary of that movie. So everybody wanted to go see him. And we actually did a smart idea, though, that not too many people always do when you want to try to meet these big names. My dad suggested saying, you know what, let's go see everybody else at this con. Let's see all the other big horror film stars. And then right at the last second, as soon as that line finishes up, we're going to run right to the end of that line and get our chance then. And it worked perfectly. So we were said to be the very last people he wanted to see. I was actually able to chat with them, saying how much, it's been, how much I really loved his movies. And I got to even have the chance saying I'm starting to work because at 16, I also went to film class. In fact, the shirt I'm wearing right now, you guys can see it's GBS TV. That was film class in high school. I took it during my junior and senior years. So here was one of my inspirations. And now I was kind of working on yes, the technology has changed, but I was following his footsteps.
I think that kind of answers Kate's. Or your favorite film director?
Oh man,
well,
composer.
That is such a difficult question because I like a lot of the different horror film directors from that older era. I mean, there's not really one that I could really think of that I think I favor over most. I think I like most of them. And as far as music composers, it's kind of hard. Again, it's kind of hard to say because I never really focused a lot on the music composers. It was more of the directors that was more focused on, because again, they were the ones that were along with the producers, were the ones that were putting these movies together.
Mm-hmm. Well, Eric's saying he finds it easier to bounce ideas off at other people. What's your thoughts, Nick? Do you think it's easier to, talk to other people about your ideas and get feedback and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad idea, to bounce off ideas off other people, because, like I said, when I tried making this other film, the one that we lost the footage to, even though I came up with it with a lot, from a lot of these other films, for the most part, it really was my idea of a film, because, again, I had to sit down, kind of think carefully over it, deciding what it's going to be, how am I going to kind of replicate it, like, as an homage to the older films. But had the camera not been stolen, that would have been my very own independent work from just an idea of my own. And it may have inspirations from older films, but it would be its own storyline. It's not a remake. It would not be a ripoff. It would be its own film.
And I mean, when you think about it, you were saying earlier on about sets and scenery and stuff. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Open Water.
Oh my God! You know what? I was just on a show last night. We were talking a little bit about that movie. That is just, oh my God! And here's the thing: I'm actually a big fan of shark movies, of course. I mean, just the idea of having people out in the middle of the ocean being surrounded by sharks, knowing that this also really happened in real life. I mean, it's quite alarming, and there's still such stories like that even to this day. So Open Water was quite a film that I mean, yes, there have been plenty of shark movies beforehand, but Open Water was definitely an ideal film to just place you in one of the worst areas possible, out in shark infested waters.
As you say, there's been plenty, Jaws, obviously, the first one that springs to mind. Talk about shark films. I think that was the original one.
Yes.
And there is, there's loads of, I've seen quite a few films to do with sharks and people in boats, and they're just, swimming about, killing everybody and what have you. But Open Water, I mean, they filmed that just from a boat with just a small camera. That's all they used. And there was no big fancy scenery, but I really like the film because it puts a thought into your mind. What would you do? You're in the middle of the ocean, your boat's away, there's nobody there, and you're just bobbing up and down. As you say, Nick,
they're actually. Sorry, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I couldn't think of a worse scenario to be in.
What I was gonna say was it's actually kind of unsettling to even think about it, because about over 15 years ago, my family and I had gone on a cruise. I think it was we were going down to Mexico for spring break. So we were taking a 7-day cruise out in the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't know about this until we landed on the Mexican shoreline, that there were two passengers on the ship that somehow fell off and went right into the ocean. And that kind of freaked me out. I mean, this was even before I ever saw the movie Open Water. I mean, if that would have been a different story had I seen, I'm thinking, oh God, are they going because you have thoughts running in your mind. Is this like what you're going to see in the movie? Is it going to happen to them, or is it going to happen again like it happened to the real scuba divers? Fortunately, from what I did hear, though, was I think somebody saw them fall in. They were able to alert, for help, and they were able to get these guys out safely out of the water. I mean, they were damn lucky, because in an area like Gulf of Mexico, those are definitely at times shark infested. So it may have not happened to me, but that's almost as close as to like a movie like that as I've ever seen.
When I think, when I hear about cruise ships and stuff, it's the Poseidon Adventure. I know it wasn't a horror movie; it was a disaster movie. But that's the film that always pops into my head. Was the Poseidon one. Eric's brought up a good film as well, Deep Blue Sea.
Good
Yep,
one.
that's right. Deep Blue Sea. That's another good one.
The obviously Deep Blue Sea. You know, the sharks are their minds are enhanced and what have you. Do you think that's actually possible that could actually happen?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, because they're actually, in addition, obviously, again, to like paranormal and horror films. I mean, and of course, it's just a month away. I'm a huge fan also of like the Discovery Channel Shark Week. So I watch a lot of that, you know, on every year. And there have been not necessarily like mutations or secret government facilities, but they do have like processed meat areas, like where, you know, these sharks tend to hang around. It develops a different personality, a different taste to them. They become far more aggressive. So until I've ever heard of, I actually hear of like some secret government facility, that's probably almost as close as we can get to like what we see in some of these movies. So, you know, it's like we hear about these stories about them being man eaters, very aggressive. In the end, it was usually brought up like what we always hear. It's usually brought on by man, not necessarily themselves.
I mean, they say the great white sharks don't actually like the taste of us. We don't taste very nice. I don't know. I've never ate a person, so I can't really comment. But seemingly, you know, they prefer turtles and stuff like that. I need to answer Kate's question. It's Spider-Man, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know what that one is.
Sorry, Kate.
Yeah, that's Spider-Man.
Steven Spielberg kind of gets to enjoy his own as endangered great white sharks, as people think they attack people in a whim. Great film, but what I gave kind of people the wrong kind of idea.
Yeah, it's, you know, just like with what I've done with, you know, as a film, you know, Steven Spielberg, for someone like him, he only made Jaws obviously just to make it a good scary movie, just to scare the hell out of everybody. He didn't think it was going to go that direction. And even he's not only regret, I think he actually tried joining in all these like responses and even somewhat protests against killing sharks. So that was not the direction that, you know, he wanted to go. He just wanted to make a good scary film, and that was it. Just making it fun for everyone.
And then all of a sudden, the great white shark became this monster. How do we know you've never ate a person? Well, all right. What I'll say is, to the best of my knowledge, I mean, some of the takeaways up here are a wee bit dodgy. You know, could be eating anything. Excuse me. That was a good film, Kate, saying The Others.
The Others, yes.
Yeah.
Nicole Kidman,
Fantastic.
I think it was.
Yeah, Nicole Kidman was in it.
That was really well put together. He donated a lot of money to charities protecting.
Yes, he did.
Protecting sharks. This has turned into a film show. Last night, Sophie and we were talking about the Marvel films and what have you. Tonight, we're talking about just blood and guts, basically. You know, it doesn't get much better than that because we're kind of nearly out of time as well. So let's talk about the paranormal side of you, the investigator side of you, before we need to wind it up. We've talked about films and stuff like that. That's done. So the paranormal side. Now, I watched a live that you were on with Lois and the other guys. I think it was 2 weeks ago. You were heading to Ohio.
That's correct. Yes.
You were getting driven to Ohio. Your signal was crap, by the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't get the best connections over there. It's yeah, I mean, when we were doing the show, I mean, my friend Tom and I, we were literally like out in the middle of nowhere. So that's why the connection just kept cracking up.
I was like that. Just try to watch it. I thought, seriously, come on, you know, hold your phone up or something, you know. Yeah, better side. Where were you headed to? I know you were going to Ohio, but what was your kind of destination and what did you get up to?
So we were heading to the Ohio State Reformatory, or Mansfield Reformatory, sometimes known as, actually for a Paracon, which was called ParasiteCon, which They started about 4 years ago now, although they didn't have it the following year after they first started because obviously of COVID-19. But we have been going almost every year, and it's such a fun event because you have a lot of these big names that are there. You had okay, let me think of just like a few of them. Brian J. Cano, Aaron Sagers from Paranormal Con Camera was there. You had the Ghost Brothers, Dave Schrader. You had Mike Ricksecker, Andrea Perrin from the Harrisville Haunting. She was there. Shane Pittman. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, all the best names that you could think of were at this event. Now, there was an investigation that was going to follow after the event was over. Unfortunately, when it comes to when you have these investigations that follow right after the events, they're called the celebrity investigations because it gives you a chance to investigate with these big names. The only problem is that they're like twice as expensive. So for us, sadly, we weren't able to attend the investigation, though. Last year in August, I finally had the opportunity of investigating OSR at nighttime. It was the first time I ever went at night. And this time it was with Jeremy's crew from the Things Network crew or the specific Things group itself in the northeastern area of Indiana. So, it's really a place that doesn't disappoint. Whether you're there for investigations, whether you're there for the history, for the event, or just wanted to check it out for, like just out of interest, it's an incredible location. It is massive. I mean, I'm not going to lie. The first time that because I've seen it in a lot of the paranormal shows, and when I saw it in person for the first time, it's also undoubtedly one of the scariest looking buildings you've ever seen because it's massive. It's this hulking, intimidating structure, and it's like I kind of got the understanding of why back in the days when it was operating as a maximum security facility, why inmates were scared of this, were terrified of this place. And of course, in addition to the ghosts and stories and history, as well as the paranormal shows have been there, it's also been the site of several movies. The most notorious of them all, undoubtedly, is The Shawshank Redemption, which was,
I'm trying to think of the name of the place. You see, you are lucky, and I mean, you have these big abandoned asylums, prisons, and stuff. We don't have anything like that here. We've got sort of mental. I hate using the word, but I've seen psychiatric hospitals here, and some of them are shut down. But they're all boarded up, they're all fenced off, CCTV, barbed wire, you name it. And you just cannot get into them at all. And but I watch, obviously, Jennifer for our American team. We speak to her quite a wee bit, and you've got all these old prisons. I'd love to go there and just, investigate like Alcatraz and stuff like that.
Well, over here, believe it or not, I mean, even in my area, just about an hour south of where I live and Kate, since she's from Chicago too, she probably will know this. Just an hour south is a town called Joliet, and right in that area we have another old prison that's called the Joliet Correctional Facility, and that's actually an even older prison than Mansfield is. Mansfield was originally built between 1886, and construction was not done until 1910. In fact, actually, 10 years after the prison, was being built, they started admitting their first inmates in 1896, and they even helped finish the construction of the prison. But in Joliet, in this case, is even older. That was constructed back in 1858, so even right before the American Civil War even happened. And believe it or not, I mean, we do have a few of those locations here too in the United States where there's just some haunted locations that you just cannot get into. They're boarded up. Joliet was one of those locations because it was in operation from 1858 up until 2002 when it closed. And for almost 20 years, it was closed up. I mean, nobody was allowed inside. It wasn't until about 5 years ago, 2018, that it finally opened for both history and paranormal tours, as well as investigations. And believe it or not, because I know Ghost Adventures had been there, they, these other shows say that they were the first. That's not true at all. I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm better or anything, but I was actually one of the very first paranormal investigators to actually go in Joliet and investigate and actually run some of the tours. And it's like what Kate said, Joliet is notorious. It's such an awesome location. Unfortunately, I have not been there for the last couple of years because, well, unfortunately, the historians are not really the friendliest people. I think they were kind of dissatisfied that I think I knew more history on this place. I think I knew more knowledge of this place than they did, and it was it was like too much, so they threw us out. But we have, even 5 years later, we still haven't given up. So one day we will be back at Joliet's.
There's a case of go away. I know the facts, you don't go away, get out, kind of thing. Eric's saying he's the opposite. He would go, he's got your history. Our history, you're totally right, Eric. Our history is older. Our history goes back, I don't know, many 1,000 years, whatever. Whereas America is what, I don't know, 300-400 years, something like that.
I think the oldest structure we have at least dates back, I think at least to the late 15, either early 16 or late 1500s. I believe that's either down somewhere along the East Coast. This was even before the American colonies were ever formed, long before we ever became the United States. But for my area, our state, Illinois, is the 21st state. It became a state back in 1818. Chicago didn't even come to existence until 1837. So I would say for us, at least for our state, Southern Illinois, I think, is a little bit older than the Chicago area is. So I think we have at least a few structures down in Southern Illinois that date back to the late 1700s. So at least for us, 250 years old.
So we're older. We've got the uppings on the history. But our history is older, and we've got many, many, many beautiful places over here, castles, etc. And but I'm just fascinated. I think it comes from my love of horror films as well. There's been quite a few horror films about prisons and old asylums and stuff, and I think that's what kind of attracts me as well, to go and investigate these kind of places. I'd love to just be left alone with a torch, and just have a wander about in the middle of the night in these places. But one last question for Kate, if I can find it. 2 seconds. I will find it. It was there. I know I've seen it. But wait a minute. Aye, there it's there. I'm on fire tonight. What's your go-to ghost hunting equipment, Nick?
So for the most part, I think I have a lot of the equipment, but I got a lot of the equipment that you could probably think of. But I would probably say my favorite, my go-to is mainly a lot of the older paranormal equipment. Like the dowsing rods, the crystal, the pendulum. Not necessarily the Ouija board, but the spirit board that you use the pendulum on, because you look back into the history of those tools. Those have been used as spirit communication for hundreds, if not thousands of years. All the other pieces of equipment we got have only been around for 20, 30, maybe 40 years at the most. If you're talking about a recorder, for example. But with the older types of equipment, like the aforementioned, again, that's been something that's probably been those are just things that have been used forever, and it's still quite exciting to see that we're still using it, these same types of communication thousands of years later. So it's nice to know that we're still keeping the memory of those older tools alive.
I totally agree. We're kind of your basic team. I'm not a tech person. And no offense to anybody uses tech, but here in the UK, I don't know it's like in America, there are some teams about, no disrespect to them, it's their thing, but they believe the more tech, the better. Now, tech can be good, for help to validate evidence, if you like. But I've said many a time, Spirit doesn't care whether you've got a £400 camera or a 35 pence ping pong ball. The Spirit's not interested. He's got a better camera than him, so I'm going to go and talk to him instead of this guy. And I think Basic's better as well, because let's face it, you could have a Spirit for the 1600s who does not know, obviously, what a camera is, or a K2 or whatever it may be, whereas they'll recognise a box or a ball. They'll recognise that. So I think Basic is better as well. I don't know if it should be kind of disturbed at this one. A lot of our serial killers come from Chicago.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. We have we have quite the number of serial killers that have come from Chicago. I'm not saying, of course, Chicago is like the serial killer capital, but we've had a lot of them. We've had John Wayne Gacy. Jeffrey Dahmer was sometimes known to come down here a few times. Of course, we had H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City, during the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Let's see, who else did we have? I know we have quite a few other ones. It's just crazy to know how many. I mean, I think honestly, I think California probably has more than us, but we certainly have our own share. In fact, I even recall a few years ago, there's a popular misconception, like, for example, with John Wayne Gacy, that after he was executed, his house was demolished. Indeed it was, but they actually built a house right on top of the old foundation. So, because there's other sites that say it's a parking lot. No way. I mean, this was made like 25, 30 years ago. And unfortunately, we did go to the house, although we couldn't go inside because, unfortunately and understandably, it is a private residence. But we were able to, at the very least, park outside the house and, get it, honestly, after about a minute after we parked outside, this was at nighttime, as you could, obviously, as you would probably imagine, I just had this really unnerving feeling. Like, it was actually, even though the house was different than the one that John lived in, it was just so unnerving to be in a spot that this was a spot where a guy had committed brutal murders on like 30 or so young men and boys, buried them in this crawl space, basically leaving them to rot, and continued collecting more victims. It's got to be one of the most strangest feelings that you could ever get. Being in an area where a serial killer lived in.
See, I get that. Something's crossed my mind a few times. It crossed my mind earlier on tonight. Eric thinks Kate has a crush on Nick, so it's Lois and Kate. Nick, you are on fire.
Oh man,
you are now the official eye candy of the paranormal.
Well, I'm in trouble because there's going to be a lot of fights following.
A lot of people are falling in love with Nicky Boy.
Well, look at the competition. Two bald guys and old bald guys, and a young handsome dude with hair.
Less of the old. There's Riggers finally woke up. Riggers was big. We worked with quite a bit. I wonder how people feel living there, if they even.
That's what I've always wanted to know. Like the current owners that live at the old Gacy, like the foundation of Gacy's house. I'm glad she brought that up, because when we were in the car, I couldn't help but wonder, thinking, do these people know like what they're living on top of? Like, do they know of what happened, 30 or 40 plus years ago? It kind of gets you wondering. Like
it does make you wonder, because I've wondered this a few times, and earlier on I was wondering because like you've got John Wayne Gacy's house, you've got the Amityville house, but I'm kind of 50-50 on Amityville, but we'll put that in the bucket. We'll put that in the pot anyway. And then I was reading earlier on today that the Chris Watts house has been sold as well.
Oh, really?
A family, it's a man and wife, and I think they've got 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. I think it's 2 girls, they've got 3 kids anyway. But obviously, it's a house with Shannon and the little girl, you know what happened. And somebody's bought that house. Now, obviously, that house is the John Wayne Gacy house. Maybe the people, you know, that bought the house weren't aware. Give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe. But, you know, a house like the Watts house, I mean, that was global news. You know, that was everywhere.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It still is today. You know, it's not disappeared any. So you wonder what, you know, no disrespect to these people, but you wonder what came through their heads moving into a house like that. Knowing.
Sometimes I often wonder if, like, well, especially if it's in a residential area where there's all these neighbors around, knowing that everybody around them probably knew who those, you know, like if you look at something like Amityville, everybody in that neighborhood knew who the DeFeos were, who the Lutzes were, and I'm sure they've probably gotten that question saying, you know what house you moved into, right? You know what happened here, or are you aware of the notoriety of this house or whatever? It's like, I'm sure all these occupants, you know, like Amityville or John Wayne Gacy or the John Wayne Gacy house, I'm sure they've gotten that familiar question, but never really found out like how they respond to it. That's the one thing you know people have asked that question, but you never really hear the answers.
You never hear the reply. Just before we wind up, I'm just going to come back to Amityville because you mentioned Amityville a couple of times, and it's a subject we covered a long time ago. And I saw the films, great films and what have you. What's your take on Amityville?
So Amityville, like I said, that was actually my very first haunted house case that I ever studied at a young age. Like once I started getting into this, ironically enough, it was around the time when the 2005 remake came out. So I didn't see it until a few years later. But at the time of its release, I actually did manage to get a DVD box set, which I still have that box set to this day, which contained the first 3 along with a bonus documentary of it. And I remember at the time, because I was still learning this stuff, I actually thought all the movies were supposed to like be based on true stories. But I obviously now that I've grown up and I've been able to really understand it a little bit more, you kind of start questioning yourself upon the different things that really occurred in Amityville. But also, in addition, it's not only just the movies of Amityville that has really been such a fascination for me, but I actually got to meet one of the kids that grew up in the house, Christopher Quarantino, and we had him at one point at the Chicago Ghost Conference a couple years back. And what he told us was, you know, everything that you heard from George Lutz was not exactly as what you read it. It's not like what you see in the book, what you see in the movie. Certainly, of course, not in the remake, obviously. He told a very different story of what really was going on in that house than what you see in the films. Like, I can already start off with this. There were no swarms of flies, apparently. No blood oozing from the walls or pigs looking into the windows. But there was indeed paranormal activity. But it was under now the belief that George Lutz actually was involved in the occult. And about a year ago, I actually did, because I talk, you know, obviously I do my show, Nick Files. I actually did a 3-part episode on Amityville alone. I mean, that's still considered my best record, I think, for Nick Files, because part 1, I was talking about the DeFeo murders that occurred. And I even talked a little bit about the history of the house even before the DeFeos ever moved in. So a lot of like hidden, never before heard information regarding this house. Part 2 was when, of course, I talked about the Lutzes and the supposed activity, because first I wanted to go along the lines of how the story was told. And then part 3, we finally got kind of behind the facts of what was true, what wasn't. And it really had quite an impact on how I was really able to present Amityville. And again, I really don't know how better you can get, like what better start can you get in the paranormal field studying these cases than the Amityville Horror. Whether there was paranormal activity involved or not, it's still just such a classic story. It's probably one of the best haunted house stories you could ever come up with.
It's a story I saw it years and years ago, and it's just gave me another. Idea, which I'll talk to you guys after the show about, and we'll
Sure.
involve Lois in it.
Yeah.
But we're going to wind up there, folks. For now, you will be seeing Nick again with his co-host Lois Haddow.
Yep.
Give her a wee mention. Hi, Lois. Love you, Doc. Love you. You're great. Fantastic. I think that's enough sugar for tonight. So, where can people find you, Nick, apart from on Lois's show? No, I did it again. Sorry.
Butter her up.
So I'm on. I'm on quite a number of different.
Sorry, Nick. I need to cut in. So that's Lois, Kate, a new rigger.
So I'm actually on a number of pages. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of different pages. I mean, not only just with Lois's show. I actually do 5 shows a week nowadays, believe it or not. So in addition to my, personal profile page you can find me on, I'm also involved on several different paranormal networks. I'm on Things Network. I'm on Temple of Phoenix Rising Entertainment, Skeleton Key Network, BB3 TV, RU Media Network, Pack Channel, Simply Spooky Network, of course, Para Unity Network, and also just recently I've been added to a 9th network, and that's It's Haunted Network. So I'm and of course I also have a YouTube page. I know we didn't really get to have a chance to talk about like my audiobooks that I do, but I'm also on YouTube. So again, I'm pretty much all over the place. But if you want to just contact me directly, you can just find me on my personal Facebook page.
It'd be easier just typing in Nick Mulae, and that's it. Then you'll find him. But I'll keep a hold of you just for a wee minute or two after we come off.
Sure.
So I've got something I'd like to talk to you about. So that's it for tonight, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Thanks to Craig as well for coming. He's down there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I do apologise for the sound issues at the start of the show. Thanks to Kate and Eric and that for helping me out with the headphones idea. I'm still waiting on the plane landing. There's no landing a plane yet. But they'll turn up eventually. So we're out tomorrow afternoon we're on a live investigation with Lois Haddow. She's coming along. And then we'll put a post up on the page tomorrow morning, tell you what time. And then if I survive, for God's sake, here we go again.
What?
Eric, I don't trust like that.
That's four in one night. You're on fire. You put me off what I was saying, Eric. Aye. So if I survive tomorrow afternoon, Lois is behind me. We're back on tomorrow night with spiritual healer Sarah Truman. Which should be the first time we'll be meeting Sarah. So that's tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. But big thanks to Nick over there and Craig down there.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So it's definitely great to be back on this.
Well, don't worry, you will be back on, buddy. You will be back on. And I'm sure you'll gather some more fans the next time.
I was going to say, not 2 years, right?
More viewers.
No. No. Next month.
Next time it will just be our voices and big picture of Nick sort of like live. We'll just...
That's what you can do. Nick, if you get any pictures of you dressed up as a fireman or something like that,
not that I know of.
Leathers or anything.
Is that a personal request?
No. It's for the people in the chat that think Nick's quite a big bit of eye candy. Know what I mean? Can maybe do a calendar a Nick calendar.
A full calendar, just like me, like with I don't know. I can't. It's like, why all of a sudden am I picturing that?
A paranormal calendar girls type thing. No, that's...
Birthday suit will do. Kate says you need an OnlyFans account. But I think you should look into the Nick calendar, like investigations, January, February, March. Do a picture each one and just do poses like, like stuff like that.
I was gonna say, it's like I don't have a book of my own, but I got a calendar with some pictures on.
Do some of that. Or do you ever watch Chicago Fire?
I've actually, it's funny you brought that up because I don't really watch it frequently, but my brother was on an episode of Chicago Fire. It was just like a 2-3 minute segment, but he plays like, he's like this college kid who, he's the one who calls the Chicago Fire authorities because his friend, I think he had chugged down like, oh man, what was it that he chugged down? It was like his character's foaming at the mouth. It was if he was here right now, I would have called him over and asked what it was. But no, he actually was on an episode of Chicago Fire, and it was really cool seeing one of my own siblings being part of being on a television show. So I was really proud of him for that.
I liked it, but the reason I asked is you should go to a local fire station and ask if they'll take a photograph of you sliding down the slope. You could be holding on and your hair. I think you've got long hair, haven't you? Have you got longish hair?
I actually did, but however, I had to get it cut, so it's not as long as now, but it'll grow back. I know it.
You could.
I think Scott's been thinking too hard about this.
No,
I think Scott's just.
You could have the kind of Jack Black, down the floor. Enough. I've gave you fans enough. So we're going to wind up here, folks. You will be seeing Nick very, very soon, and watch out for OnlyFans when he releases his calendar. I worry about your dreams tonight. My coat only hangs in one side of the door, my friend. No. Right, we'll leave it there, folks, because we're rabbiting on here, and Nick's head's getting that like bigger and bigger. And plus, we need to let Lois have a wee bit of time with him as well. Can't be too selfish. You know what I mean? So, thanks again to Nick and to Craig and to everybody watching, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night. And take care. Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Bye.